I am Maya, 32 years old, and I was sitting at a pristine mahogany dining table when my brother-in-law threw his Tesla keys at my water glass, offering to pay for an Uber so I wouldn't infect my parents' Buckhead mansion with the stench of poverty. My mother and father laughed, clinking their crystal wine glasses in agreement, as if it were the funniest joke of the year. I simply smiled back at them. They had absolutely no idea that the woman they were humiliating was actually the CEO of a $3.8 billion transportation and logistics empire, or that a fleet of corporate helicopters was already on its way to shatter their fake reality. Before I share the rest of my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to sit silently while toxic family members underestimated your worth and tried to tear you down. To truly understand how we reached that explosive moment, you have to understand the suffocating, image-obsessed atmosphere of the Davis family Thanksgiving. Growing up in the affluent neighborhoods of Atlanta, being part of my family meant adhering to a strict, unspoken code of conduct. Appearance was the only currency that truly mattered. Emotional connection was entirely secondary to social status. My father, Marcus, was a former high-level banking executive who measured human worth strictly by credit limits, designer labels, and exclusive zip codes. To him, you were only as valuable as your investment portfolio. My mother, Valerie, was a socialite whose entire existence revolved around country club memberships, charity galas, and maintaining the illusion of absolute flawless perfection. And then there was my older sister, Jasmine. Jasmine was 34, effortlessly beautiful, deeply shallow, and the undisputed golden child of the Davis family. She had followed my parents' blueprint perfectly. She married Preston, a 36-year-old finance bro who worked at a boutique venture capital firm. Together, they were my parents' ultimate trophy. They were the perfect photogenic couple to parade around in front of their wealthy friends to prove that the family legacy was secure. I was the complete opposite. I was the quiet, analytical daughter who preferred studying logistics algorithms and coding over debutante balls and country club gossip. Because I refused to play their superficial games, because I did not care about designer handbags or marrying into old money, I was permanently cast as the family failure. I had moved out at 18 and built my own life, far from their constant judgment. But I still maintained occasional contact out of a misplaced sense of familial obligation. Last Thursday, they invited me to their grand Thanksgiving dinner. I foolishly hoped for a peaceful holiday meal, a rare moment where we could just be a family. I should have known better. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the heavy scent of roasted sage turkey, buttery stuffing, and the overwhelmingly expensive floral perfume my mother bathed herself in. We were seated around a massive custom-built mahogany table that my mother polished obsessively. Crystal glasses caught the light from the extravagant chandelier above us, and fine silver cutlery clinked heavily against imported bone china. The conversation had been flowing around me for over an hour, consisting entirely of shallow bragging and aggressive name-dropping. Jasmine was holding court wearing a designer silk dress that likely cost more than most people earn in a month. My parents hung on to her every word, nodding in vigorous agreement at whatever mundane story she was telling about her country club friends. I was quietly eating my meal, minding my own business, and hoping to slip out unnoticed right after dessert when the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The warmth of the room turned instantly cold. My mother, Valerie, carefully sliced a piece of turkey and placed it on her plate. She did not take a bite. Instead, she slowly raised her head and locked her eyes onto me. Her gaze swept over my simple, tailored silk vest, a piece I deliberately chose for its understated comfort. But to her, anything without a massive, recognizable designer logo was essentially trash. She let out a sharp, theatrical sigh that was expertly designed to command the absolute attention of everyone at the table. "You are still taking public transportation?" Maya, my mother, asked. Her voice was dripping with calculated condescension engineered to inflict maximum public embarrassment. She tilted her head, looking at me through half-closed eyes, as if I were a tragic charity case. "Are you really telling me that a grown woman of 32 years old is still waiting at dirty bus stops in the city? Do you not feel any shame at all? Look at your sister Jasmine. She has 3 cars, Maya. 3 beautiful luxury vehicles sitting in her driveway, and here you are arriving at our doorstep on a city bus like a commoner. It is deeply embarrassing for all of us. You show absolutely no ambition, no drive, and frankly, no respect for how your appearance reflects on the rest of us. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but the table grew dead silent. Before I could even formulate a response to her ridiculous attack, my father decided it was his turn to join the ambush. He scoffed loudly from the head of the table, aggressively wiping the corners of his mouth with a crisp white linen napkin. "Your mother is entirely right," he said, his deep voice echoing in the large cavernous dining room. "It is pathetic, Maya. Truly pathetic. We live in an exclusive, highly secured, gated community in Buckhead. The people who live on this street are chief surgeons, corporate lawyers, and bank presidents. And I have to sit here and worry about my neighbors looking out their massive bay windows and seeing my own daughter trudging up the driveway after getting off a public transit route." My father shook his head in absolute disgust, picking up his expensive glass of red wine. "What do you think that says about me? What do you think that says about this family's legacy? Do not let the neighbors know you take the city bus to work. I have spent decades building a flawless high society reputation in this city, and you are actively tarnishing it by refusing to properly invest in your presentation. You are making us look like we cannot provide for our own. You are making us look weak." The relentless coordinated tag team of insults was standard operating procedure for my family. They fed off each other's cruelty, validating their own shallow choices by actively tearing down mine. Jasmine chimed in next, letting out a sharp theatrical laugh that grated against my ears. "Oh, Preston is right," Maya Jasmine said, swirling the champagne in her glass. "You really need to start caring about your presentation. You are 32. It is getting embarrassing to try and explain what you do to my friends. When are you going to stop playing around with whatever little tech support job you have and get your life together? You cannot keep living like a struggling college student forever. It is time to grow up and face reality." I looked at my sister, feeling a familiar coldness settle deep in my chest. I thought about the grueling hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, and the absolute relentless grind I had put myself through over the last decade to build Aero Vanguard Logistics. I thought about how quickly they assumed my silence meant failure. But what happened next pushed the evening completely past the point of no return. My brother-in-law Preston sat next to Jasmine, radiating an unearned aggressive arrogance. He was exactly the kind of man my father worshipped. Loud, aggressive, and fluent in the language of fake wealth and hollow corporate buzzwords. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked at me with pure, unfiltered pity. "Seriously," Maya Preston said, using that booming corporate voice he probably used to intimidate junior analysts at his firm. "It is basic economics. If you do not invest in yourself, nobody else will. Taking the bus is a poverty mindset. You need to project success. You need to fake it until you make it. That is exactly how I secured my new vice president position. It is all about the image you project to the world." Then Preston let out a loud, mocking laugh that cut right through the heavy tension in the dining room. He reached into the pocket of his perfectly tailored suit jacket and pulled out his heavy Tesla key fob. With a condescending, arrogant smirk plastered across his face, he tossed the keys directly across the mahogany table. The heavy fob slid hard against the polished wood and violently smacked into the base of my crystal water glass. The glass tipped, spilling a small pool of ice water onto the immaculate white tablecloth. "Let me call you an Uber Black to get home, Maya." Preston sneered, looking at me as if I were something he had scraped off the bottom of his expensive Italian loafers. "I will pay for it. Seriously, do not worry about the cost, I can easily cover it. We just cannot have you bringing that public transit smell into the house again. It is bad for the custom upholstery, and it is frankly offensive to the rest of us." The entire table erupted into cruel, synchronized, mocking laughter. My mother chuckled behind her manicured hand, her eyes sparkling with malicious joy at my expense. My father gave a booming laugh of approval, completely validating Preston's terrible behavior. Jasmine beamed at her husband, looking at him like he was an absolute genius for humiliating her own flesh and blood. They all sat there in their expensive clothes, eating their expensive food, completely united in their disdain for me. They fully expected me to break. They expected me to cry, to shrink down into my chair, to apologize for being such a massive disappointment, and to accept their humiliation just like I always did when I was a helpless teenager living under their roof. But I was no longer that frightened, dependent girl. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice, and I did not show a single ounce of the anger that was currently boiling just beneath my skin. Instead, I simply picked up my wine glass, feeling the cool, heavy crystal against my fingers. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red wine, letting the silence stretch out as their laughter finally began to die down. I looked right into Preston's smug face, and then at my parents', and a cold, razor-sharp smile spread across my lips. I was fully loaded, locked on target, and absolutely ready to deliver my first devastating strike. I set my crystal wine glass down with a sharp, deliberate clink. The sound cut through their fading laughter like a gunshot. I kept my eyes locked directly on my sister, bypassing my brother-in-law completely for a moment. 3 cars, Jasmine. I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. That truly is an impressive fleet for someone who has not worked a single day since graduating from a vanity degree program. Jasmine stiffened, her posture going rigid against the high back of her custom-upholstered dining chair. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a defensive glare. "Excuse me?" She snapped, her manicured fingers tightening around her linen napkin. "I manage a complex household and a very active social calendar. You have absolutely no idea what my life entails." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. "I know exactly what your life entails, Jasmine. But let us talk about how that impressive car collection started. Let us talk about your very first luxury vehicle, the silver Mercedes-Benz C-Class. Do you remember that one?" My mother inhaled sharply, her hand flying to the pearls at her throat. "Maya, that is ancient history. We are not discussing this right now." "Oh, but we are discussing presentation and ambition, Mother," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with Jasmine. "I think it is highly relevant. You see, Preston, since you are so fascinated by how people acquire their vehicles, you should know the origin story of your wife's first Mercedes. I was 18 years old. I had spent 4 grueling years maintaining a perfect grade point average, sacrificing my social life because I assumed the college fund my parents had supposedly set up for me would cover my university tuition. But when my acceptance letters arrived, that fund magically disappeared. My father slammed his hand flat against the table. "We made a financial decision for the good of the family image," Marcus barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Jasmine was rushing a top-tier sorority at a highly prestigious university. She needed a reliable, respectable vehicle to maintain her social standing among her peers. "You were just planning to study computer science at a local state school. You did not need a luxury car." "Right," I said, nodding slowly as if agreeing with his twisted, toxic logic. "I did not need a luxury car. I just needed to pay for my own tuition because you drained my entire life savings account to buy her a graduation present." But the truly fascinating part of this story is what happened 6 months later. I turned my attention back to Jasmine, watching the color slowly drain from her perfectly contoured face. It was late January. We had that massive freak snowstorm in Atlanta. The entire city shut down. The roads were covered in 2 inches of solid, treacherous ice. I had picked up a brutal night shift packing boxes at a logistics warehouse just to cover the cost of my community college textbooks. I begged you, Mom and Dad, to let me borrow the old beat-up Volvo station wagon just for that one single night, so I would not freeze to death, waiting for a city bus that was never going to come. "You were terrible at driving in the snow," my mother deflected, her voice shrill and defensive. "It was a massive liability. We could not risk the insurance premiums going up if you wrecked it." "You could not risk the insurance premiums on a 10-year-old Volvo," I countered, my voice dropping an octave, heavy with years of suppressed rage. But that very same night, you let Jasmine take her brand new, fully financed Mercedes out in the middle of a literal ice storm. Why? Because there was an exclusive winter mixer at a club in Midtown, and she absolutely had to be seen there. I let the words hang in the suffocating heat of the dining room. I looked at the extravagant Thanksgiving feast spread out before us, feeling absolutely nothing but pure contempt for the people sitting around it, while you were sipping overpriced martinis on your parents' dime. Jasmine, I was wrapping my feet in plastic grocery bags inside my boots so my toes would not get frostbite. I walked 5 miles down Peachtree Street in the freezing, blinding sleet. I fell twice on the solid ice. My hands were so numb by the time I reached the warehouse that I could not even punch in my own time card. I spent 8 straight hours lifting heavy freezing cardboard boxes in an unheated facility, working until my fingers physically bled, all to pay for an education you actively tried to steal from me. Jasmine scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically and crossing her arms over her chest. Oh, please, Maya, stop playing the eternal victim. You survived, did you not? This whole woe is me routine is exactly why you are still struggling in life. Successful people do not dwell on the past, they overcome it. You would not know the first thing about overcoming anything, I stated flatly. You have had your entire existence handed to you on a silver platter purchased with my stolen future. That is enough, Preston suddenly commanded, slapping his hand against the mahogany table, hard enough to make the crystal water glasses rattle. Preston puffed out his chest, leaning aggressively toward me across the table. The veins in his neck were visibly pulsing against his stiff collar. He was a man who lived his entire life believing his pedigree, and his corporate title granted him absolute authority over every room he entered. He looked at me with a mixture of profound disgust and elite superiority. Listen to me very carefully, Maya, Preston growled, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at my face. Jasmine earned her place in society. She married well, she networks with the right people, and she impeccably maintains the lifestyle required of our specific class. We work incredibly hard for our wealth. I secure multi-million-dollar funding rounds for prestigious venture capital firms, while you sit here and complain about manual labor from a decade ago. It is not our fault you are permanently stuck at the absolute bottom of the corporate food chain. My parents nodded in fierce, immediate agreement. My father actually smiled at Preston, looking at his arrogant son-in-law with immense, pathetic pride. You sit here reeking of jealousy. Preston continued, his voice growing louder, more domineering. You completely resent us because we represent everything you failed to achieve. This is how the real world works, Maya. The strong provide and conquer, and the weak take the bus. If you actually applied yourself, if you had a single ounce of real business acumen, maybe you could afford a lease on a decent, reliable Honda. But no, you would rather sit at our holiday table, eat our expensive food, and harbor pathetic, childish resentment over my success. Preston leaned back heavily in his chair, looking incredibly satisfied with his cruel speech. He truly believed he had just delivered a masterful, unanswerable debate victory. He believed he had successfully put the poor, struggling sister back in her miserable, proper place. I stared at him for a long, heavy moment. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. The air in the room grew incredibly dense, thick with the electric charge of impending destruction. I slowly shifted my gaze from Preston's red, arrogant face down to the heavy Tesla key fob resting on the mahogany table right next to my spilled water. You like showing off cars so much, Preston? I asked, my voice suddenly soft, almost conversational. I reached inside the inner pocket of my tailored vest and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the illuminated screen once the harsh blue light casting a cold glow across my face in the warmly lit dining room. The space fell dead silent, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a devastating storm. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Preston. I watched his confident, arrogant sneer falter for a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. He shifted his weight, the heavy fabric of his expensive custom suit, rustling loudly against the leather upholstery of his chair. I swiped past my personal emails and opened the specific PDF document I had received just hours earlier from a private investigator I kept on retainer. I took my time. I let them wait. I let the agonizing tension build until it visibly choked the air out of the room. I slid the phone across the smooth mahogany surface, stopping it exactly an inch from the heavy Tesla key fob Preston had so dramatically slammed down just moments ago. Read it! I instructed, my voice dropping to a near whisper that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Read it aloud for the entire table, Preston, since you are the resident expert on financial acumen and institutional wealth. Preston glared at me with pure venom, then reluctantly dropped his gaze to the glowing screen. I watched his eyes scan the top line of the document. The color drained from his face with terrifying, satisfying speed, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw went completely slack. The prominent vein that had been pulsing with arrogant rage on his neck just a moment ago now throbbed with raw, unadulterated panic. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his stiff collar. "What is this?" Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. She could sense the sudden violent shift in the room's power dynamic. She leaned over her plate, stretching her neck to try and see the screen. Preston snatched the phone off the table with lightning speed, his thumb frantically mashing the power button to plunge the screen into darkness. But I had already anticipated his cowardice. My thumb had previously authorized a continuous screen lock override. The bright white document remained stubbornly illuminated in his shaking hand. "Give that back to her." Jasmine snapped her perfectly manicured nails, digging fiercely into Preston's wrist. She yanked my device toward her side of the table, ripping it from his weak grasp. Jasmine's eyes darted frantically across the digital document. Her breathing hitched a sharp gasp, escaping her painted lips. "Notice of default and active intent to repossess." She read, her voice barely more than a breathless, horrified wheeze. She looked up slowly, staring at her husband as if he had suddenly morphed into a complete stranger. "Preston, what does this mean?" "Capital One Auto Finance. 4 months past due. Active recovery agents dispatched." Preston stammered, his polished corporate vocabulary completely abandoning him in his moment of sheer panic. He tugged forcefully at his collar, suddenly suffocating in his own tailored shirt. "It is a clerical error, Jasmine. A massive banking glitch. You know how these institutional algorithms make stupid mistakes. I have my executive assistant clearing it up on Tuesday morning. It means absolutely nothing." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap, projecting nothing but absolute icy control. "It is not a glitch, Preston," I stated, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the stunned silence of the room. "It is a final, non-negotiable repossession order filed at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. You are 120 days delinquent on your exorbitant lease payments. The bank has already dispatched a recovery agent to collect their property. In fact, the only reason that car is currently sitting in my parents' driveway right now is because you intentionally parked it behind my father's oversized SUV, blocking it entirely from the street view. You are hiding it from the repo men." I let my gaze sweep slowly across the table, taking in my mother's horrified gasp as she clutched the pearls at her throat and my father's stunned, rigid posture. Then I looked right back at the supposed master of the universe. "Tell me all about the strong, providing, and conquering Preston," I mocked, throwing his own arrogant, toxic words right back into his teeth. "Tell me again about securing multi-million-dollar funding rounds while you cannot even manage a basic monthly car payment. You sit at this table and degrade me for working manual labor 10 years ago to survive while you are currently drowning in toxic debt to fund a counterfeit lifestyle you absolutely cannot afford." Jasmine dropped my phone onto the table like it was burning her skin. She turned her entire body toward Preston, her voice rising to a hysterical, piercing pitch. 4 months. You told me you paid off that lease in full with your end-of-year performance bonus. You explicitly told me the wire transfer cleared in December. Where did that money go, Preston? Where is the bonus money?" Preston's eyes darted wildly around the room, seeking an escape route that did not exist. "Keep your voice down, Jasmine," he hissed, glancing nervously at my father. "We are not discussing our private household finances in front of her." "But you were more than happy to violently dissect my finances, were you not?" I countered instantly, refusing to let him breathe for a single second. "You were thrilled to weaponize my past struggles to make yourself look like an untouchable titan of industry. You are a complete fraud, Preston. A hollow, over-leveraged shell wearing a luxury Rolex you probably bought on a high-interest credit card. You talk about the bottom of the corporate food chain, but at least I actually own the ground I stand on. You do not even legally own the steering wheel you grip so proudly." My mother pressed her linen napkin hard to her mouth, her eyes darting between her golden daughter and her failing son-in-law. "Preston, tell me this is a horrible misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice cracking with the desperate need to maintain the illusion of her perfect, flawless family. "Tell me you are not facing bankruptcy." Marcus, my father, remained ominously silent at the head of the table. His jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. He was a man who worshipped wealth status and public perception above all else, including his own children. Seeing his golden son-in-law exposed as a desperate financial charlatan was a profound personal insult to his own judgment. Preston realized he had completely lost the room. He had lost his wife's blind faith, his in-laws' deep respect, and his own fabricated dignity. His face morphed rapidly from pale fear into a dark, ugly, terrifying crimson. The absolute humiliation was too much for his fragile, inflated ego to process, so it immediately converted into explosive, violent anger. "You little—" He spat, his voice dropping into a guttural, animalistic growl. "You hacked into my personal banking accounts. You committed a federal cybercrime to get this private information. I will have my firm's lawyers throw you in federal prison for the next decade. Public record, you absolute fool," I corrected him smoothly, deeply enjoying the raw, helpless desperation shining in his eyes. When a financial institution files a final recovery order involving a primary residence linked to a corporate LLC, which you stupidly used to lease that vehicle for corporate tax write-offs, it immediately becomes a matter of public corporate filing. I did not hack anything. I just pay attention to the legal details you are too arrogant and careless to hide properly. That was the breaking point. The final violent snap of Preston's fragile masculinity. He slammed both his large hands down on the mahogany table with explosive, terrifying force. The impact rattled the fine china and sent expensive red wine sloshing heavily over the rims of the crystal glasses, staining the immaculate white tablecloth. His heavy dining chair shrieked against the hardwood floor as he kicked it back violently, standing up to his full, towering height. His broad chest heaved, his fists clenched tight and shaking at his sides. He lunged forward, reaching his long arms directly across the table toward me, his face twisted in pure, unhinged rage. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. I just sat perfectly still and stared right back into his furious, bloodshot eyes, waiting for him to make the ultimate, unforgivable mistake. "Preston, sit your ass down right now." My father's voice boomed through the dining room, like a crack of thunder carrying a brutal, terrifying authority that demanded absolute and instant obedience. Preston froze mid-lunge, his hands hovering mere inches from my dinner plate. He looked sharply at my father, his chest still heaving, breathing heavily and aggressively through his nose. Marcus stood up slowly and deliberately at the head of the table. He did not look at Preston. He looked directly at me. His dark eyes were cold, incredibly calculating, and completely devoid of any parental warmth or protective instinct. He was not stopping Preston to protect me from physical violence. He was stopping him because losing emotional control was low class, and Marcus had a much sharper, far deadlier psychological weapon to wield against me. "You think you are so incredibly clever," Maya Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that chilled the blood in my veins. "You think digging up a few late car payments makes you the smartest, most powerful person in the room. You think you can march into my home and dismantle my family piece by piece to satisfy your pathetic, lifelong jealousy." He took a slow, deliberate step toward my side of the table, his eyes locked onto mine like a predator sizing up prey. "You want to talk about financial fraud today. You want to play the righteous, untouchable crusader, exposing everyone's hidden debts and failures. Fine. Let us play your game, Maya. Let us talk about exactly how you funded that shiny new independent design firm of yours. Let us talk about the real hidden reason your former business partner suddenly fled the state last month." I did not even blink. I knew exactly what he was trying to do. Marcus was desperately throwing smoke bombs to divert attention away from Preston's financial collapse. My former partner did not flee the state. I corrected, my voice ringing with absolute, unwavering clarity. She relocated to Chicago to manage our newly opened Midwest branch, a strategic expansion fully funded by our own first quarter profits. You would know that if you ever bothered to read the quarterly reports I send you, which I know you toss directly into the shredder. There is no scandal to uncover here, Marcus. My firm is entirely clean, entirely profitable, and entirely mine. The focus whipped violently back to Marcus. His jaw tightened so hard I could hear his teeth grinding. The bluff had failed spectacularly. He seamlessly shifted tactics, completely dismissing Preston's humiliation. He ignored his golden son-in-law, who was currently hyperventilating over his exposed insolvency, desperately pulling at his expensive silk tie. "You are a destructive, spiteful woman," Marcus snarled, slamming his fist onto the table with a deafening crack. "You come into this house, eat our holiday food, and deliberately orchestrate a vicious attack to humiliate your sister's husband. You have absolutely no concept of family loyalty or basic decency. You are a complete disgrace to this family name." My attention snapped back to my own defense. "I am a disgrace," I shot back, pointing a steady, unyielding finger at Preston's pale, sweating face. He just admitted to leasing a luxury vehicle through a fraudulent shell company to dodge corporate taxes, and he is currently defaulting on it. Yet I am the disgrace for simply holding up a mirror to his pathetic, crumbling reality. The perspective whipped back to Marcus. He ignored the logic entirely. He reached down beside his massive leather armchair and pulled up a thick, heavy manila folder. He tossed it violently across the dining table. It slid across the polished mahogany and landed with a loud, authoritative slap, right on top of Preston's digital repossession notice, effectively burying the evidence of his son-in-law's failure under a new, darker agenda. "Sign it," Marcus demanded. I looked down at the folder. A stark white legal label on the front read, "Transfer of Deed and Relinquishment of Property Rights." I did not touch it. I looked back up at my father, my eyes narrowing into defensive slits. "What is this?" "That is the solution to the toxic, resentful attitude you have harbored for the last 10 years, Marcus stated coldly, his eyes dead and calculating. "It is the deed to that useless, barren stretch of dirt your grandfather left you out in the valley. We have already drawn up the necessary legal documents with our corporate attorneys. You are transferring full ownership to the family trust effective immediately. Sign the papers, Maya." A sharp, breathless laugh tore from my throat as the sheer audacity of his demand washed over me. "The land. You mean the 50 acres of absolute wasteland Grandpa left exclusively to me? The same land you mocked relentlessly at his funeral. You stood in front of all our relatives and called it a sentimental pile of weeds. You told everyone at the reception that the old man had finally lost his mind, leaving Jasmine the lucrative, fully leased commercial strip malls, while handing me a worthless patch of dirt. Now you suddenly want it back." The focus swung sharply to Marcus, whose face remained completely devoid of shame or irony. "Circumstances change," he snapped, tapping his heavy gold pen against the table in a rapid, agitated rhythm. "And frankly, considering the stunt you just pulled to embarrass Preston, you owe this family immediate reparations. Preston's venture capital fund is experiencing a temporary strategic liquidity crisis due to unpredictable market fluctuations." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the monumental delusion happening right in front of me. "A temporary liquidity crisis," I repeated, absolutely astounded.